pointing to an issue about and around the turnout as you were watching this exercise.
Actually, I must confess, I spent very little time today in front of television screens. Most of the day I was driving around Kiambu, Limuru sides of Kiambu, engaging people on the roadside and at small shopping centers and so on after they had voted, because I can always watch your presentations of the day on videos, but I wanted to get some fresh impressions.
What were you getting from them?
Well, I must have engaged, I don't know, close to 100 people, if not more, in 5 or 6, 7 different groupings. And after a few exchanges, there seemed to be, maybe by majority rules, a kind of consensus. And each consensus in these groups was quite different. I remember the first group that I engaged, which was closer to Ruaka, and I may take this opportunity to thank all these people, if any of them are watching tonight, for taking the time to engage with me today in a very pleasant and constructive way, even if it was also interesting to see, in one sense, the spirit of grassroots democracy that in some of these groups, and I presume most of these people knew each other, or they wouldn't have been sitting together where they were quite at ease in disagreeing among themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, aside from the technology of election implementation administration, a sign that multi-partyism, if we want to call it that, is becoming domesticated and has got more legitimacy, certainly than it did when, I'm sure you and I first started looking at these multi-party elections, 25 whatever years ago. But just to pinpoint a couple of things, in a couple of groups, people confessed, even though most of them had ink on their vidoles, that there wasn't very much interest in the election compared to the last couple, and they gave their opinions for that.
Right.
Not having a presidential candidate from that area, at least not either one of the two serious ones, if I can use that term, even if both of the deputy running mates are from the Mount Kenya region, they didn't seem to figure in the sort of energy consciousness nearly as much as the two presidential candidates. Mm-hmm. But I must say, in a couple of other groups, where I asked people who had voted before, they thought that the lines were just as long as and has formed as early as in the past. So we'll just have to wait and get the final polling station results on turnout. I guess the only other thing I would say is that there was a general agreement that our work as pollsters, if I can use the collective our, CC,
yes,
is to be taken with a pinch of chumvi, that there were quite a few people who cautioned me, not that I needed it, that some people were not necessarily giving us honest answers. Both those who said undecided, like a number of people said, of course, wameamua kitambo. And so if they're saying they're undecided, they were hiding something. And that really raises the question, as I raised in our release, who those people might be. And my conclusion was, although it's divided on balance, mm-hmm. I would think that seeing the support from the head of state to the Azimio candidate, there would be, other things being equal, more shyness among certain survey respondents to admit that they were voting for the de facto opposition candidate, that is the deputy president. Okay. So leaving aside the other margins of error and these other calculations and conditions on polls, I think that was something niliweka tik hapo.
All right, Tom, more on that in a moment. Prof, I want to come back to the point you made that voting was quite seamless and efficient. It's great to know you had a good experience, but there were many people countrywide who actually felt very frustrated because they were not able, the IEBC officials were not able to recognize them as voters, and this primarily was due to failures of KIM's kits, and even the IEBC has acknowledged that. This is technology, yes, but I mean, should we be surprised, or was this perhaps expected to an extent, although it seems to have caught a number of people by surprise?
I think if you remember the last few weeks, the debate has been between the IEBC and the political parties in terms of, do we use the manual registers as complementary or not? Why are we only using technology? And the debate on the one side was, if you use the manual register, you are opening up avenues for rigging. But on the other side was, if you only use the technology, you are actually avoiding the reality that technology will fail, and it failed in several instances. Actually, what is for me more concerning is that, having failed, the manner in which it was supposed to be addressed, first, was not uniform across the country, and secondly, there are many citizens. I personally met people in polling stations who say, I checked, I verified a week ago, and my name, I got the SMS, here it is. Today, when they're checking, it's not on the KIMS kit, and even if you use the document, it's not there. And because the manual register was not available in certain places, you'd hear a presiding officer telling you, I sympathize with you, but I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. And I think to make the point that there's nothing I can do to a voter is not one of those nice things, because then you're then saying that my rights have been disenfranchised.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's something we must, as a country, relook at, because it is, the Constitution says that the system we use must be simple, and the administrative processes must aid people to vote. When they now prevent people from voting, it's something we should be thinking.
So is this then the fault of the IEBC in your view?
I don't think it's the fault of the IEBC.
But they're in charge.
I think it's...
and they had 5 years to plan.
They had 5 years to... I think there are two problems. Problem number one is, in 2017, we had a huge debate again about, do we use technology or do we use manual register. The bigger problem is that the trust levels in our elections does not exist, and because that nobody trusts the other, everybody thinks the other person is just going to use this as an opportunity for getting an advantage, even when it is a legitimate thing. And I think that's the bigger issue we need to address in terms of technology. Technology is not supposed to provide integrity. It's supposed to provide efficiency. But in this country, we think that technology provides integrity. As a consequence, we lose people.
But I mean, what happened on the eve of the election? That was yesterday, and there was a ruling there suspending a decision for the IEBC to use the manual register in the general election. However, the chairperson of the IEBC did say that if all else fails, the KIMS kits fails, we should be able to use a manual register. But it doesn't seem to have been understood across the board. It seems they were falling back, or at least if you're not able to be identified using the biometrics, then you won't be able to vote, which shouldn't be the case.
There are two problems with what happened. The first problem is, as soon as that ruling was given yesterday, I remember making a point to my friends, we are going to be in trouble tomorrow, because the first IEBC had said before, we will not have the register at all. After push and pull, they said, no, it will be there, but as a fallback, backup last resort. Then the court, then the High Court said, actually, no, it's actually also supposed to be for cancelling people's names, so that you're able to then compare. Yesterday, the Court of Appeal said, we are going back to the position that we had said in 2017. Remember, by that time, people had been trained. And you know, the people who make decisions in these elections, when we say the polling stations is final, we need to recognize the people who make decisions are temporary staff, a presiding officer and a clerk who was trained a week ago or who was trained 2 days ago. So the process of sending this information, I knew, was not going to be equal across the board. That's the first problem. Problem number two was the idea about when all else fails. IEBC seems to have contemplated that all else fails means that the KIMS kits are not working, as happened in Kakamega and has happened in some place in Kampani region. And even then, the presiding officer has to call back. So it took time to get people. But the more important thing that I think nobody contemplated, what happens when Collins's name is not on the you can't be recognized on either of these things, yet you registered. Nobody contemplated that, because then IEBC says, no, the KIMS kits didn't fail. But you see, for me as the voter, it actually failed. Because it didn't recognize me. That, I think, is one that was not addressed.